Apologize. It's been a busy day. And some faces I saw earlier today that are in the room at another event. So I do appreciate you giving me a few moments to stop by and talk a little bit about African American history in the area. And it's particularly an honor for me in light of what just happened on Election Day. I don't want to get involved in partisan politics, but I'm about as happy as I can be that Lee District had the highest performance for Barack Obama in all of Fairfax County. But that's just my personal opinion. But I do want to, talk a little bit about some history in Lee District, and in particular, I think it's important. I picked a couple stories that I like that relate a little bit more to today's economy and the difficult times that we have. We've been through these things before, and I think a couple of the things I want to relate to you took courage from people ahead of us, and in these difficult economic times will take our courage to get out of again. But before I do that, I do want to admit that having been someone who's lived in Fairfax County my entire life, being born and raised here, I do know a lot about the history of the area, not just African American history, but history in general, and I love to talk about history among my colleagues on the board, because as the youngest board member who sometimes knows more about local history than some of the older board members, I love to make them nervous about that. But I was born and raised on the Route 1 corridor, went to Fairfax County Public Schools, and had a teacher at Woodlawn Elementary School that some of you in the room may know, Dr. Burton, who taught me a lot about African American history in the area. Went to Walt Whitman Middle School, and right around the corner from there, of course, was Gum Springs, which many of you know is rich with African American history in Fairfax County. As much as I love the Mount Vernon district, having grown up on the Route 1 corridor, I love the Lee district more, which is the district I represent. And there's a couple stories that I will relay to you about things that have happened locally in the past and in history in the Lee district. But I did want to tell you that this community's been home for me for a long time, and my grandmother, who's played a major role in raising me, served on the Commission on Aging in Fairfax County for a long time, and she always taught me to respect my elders and to study history. And she also was the chief registrar in Fairfax County for many years, and even as a kid I can remember her using her home as a voter registration location on the Route 1 corridor. And she particularly reached out to women and to African Americans when they gained the right to vote, to try to encourage them to register and participate in our election process and in local politics. Closer to home, there are three particular things that I wanted to point out. One, for those of you who are familiar with Old Telegraph Road, you might have driven by the bank's property, which you have to stop your car to get out and read the sign to understand a little bit about what that property is and who was involved in that. But I was particularly proud some years ago to work with Supervisor Kaufman and some other local folks in the community to work with the Banks family, which of course owned Banks Auto Parts, which is a big enterprise in the area, to work with them to preserve their property as a piece of history in Lee District. And as the area blossomed around this now spot of green pasture in Lee District, the demand for parklands and open space, of course, has always increased. And it's always amazing to look at this property because it's virtually surrounded by pretty high-density townhouse units in Kingstowne. And what a great patch of land to preserve in the county. And the African American history involved in that land made it particularly important. Olander Banks, who of course owned the property, and his wife Margaret originally purchased that property in 1957, and it's 10 acres, and it was originally given or sold to Jane Carroll, a freed slave, in about 1850 by the Johnson family of West Grove Plantation. This property became, of course, the cornerstone of the Carroll family's land acquisitions in the Kingstowne area. When the Banks purchased it in 57, it was an open gravel pit, which actually a good chunk of the district was. You didn't already know that. They added 1,000 loads of fill dirt to the property so they could build their home on the site, and that home was built in 1961. The Banks raised 9 children in that home, which always amazes me when I look at it. It really makes you reflect a little bit on where we are as a society now and how much more respectful of our resources we can be. I look at the size of that house and picture raising 9 children in there. And in today's world, fast-paced world, where everyone's focused on home size and largesse, it's particularly stunning that you could raise 9 children in that house the way they were, and they made it quite fun. So it'll be a lesson for all of us. And as I mentioned today, that property is surrounded by the Hayfield, Kingstowne community. And I mentioned Banks Auto Parts, which of course is a very successful company. And as a result of that, Mr. Banks had an opportunity to sell this property on multiple occasions to developers to build more townhomes and houses in the area. But he resisted that and worked with the Fairfax County Park Authority to preserve that property. Financially, it was great that he was able to do that, because now we have this patch of green space forever with a marker. But it's also a testament to the business common sense that he had and the success of his family. As you know, the Park Authority, during that same period of time we got this land dedicated, was working very hard to preserve property in the county, which is a very expensive task. So whatever we could work with the family with a rich history in the area to dedicate it indefinitely and have that family's mark on that property forever preserved, it's a great win-win for the community. If you visit the park today, I mentioned you'll see a sign, and the sign reads, "This site is preserved in perpetuity as a park thanks to the generosity of Orlando Banks Sr., who dedicates it to the memory of his wife, Margaret Lomax Banks." And I encourage you to stop by the property and take a look at it. You'd be amazed in the sea of asphalt and townhouses that surround it. There's a little piece of serenity right along a well-traveled road. So I hope you will stop by and visit that. I mentioned the Banks property was originally sold to Jane Carroll, a freed slave, in about 1850 from the estate of Dennis Johnson. In 1899 and again in 1903, her son bought an adjacent 121 acres from Dennis Johnson's heirs. This site became Carrolltown, now the Kingstowne community. Carrolltown was once the home of 3 African-American families, the Carrolls, the Bakers, and the Harrises. A marker commemorates the site and reads, quote, "In this vicinity, a small African-American settlement grew from 10 acres of land given to Jane Carroll by her owner, Dennis Johnson, before 1856, end quote. And there's another marker to commemorate this, and you can find that at the intersection of Kingstowne Village Parkway and Summer Ridge Road. And that marker was dedicated by the History Commission on April 12, 2003. Jane's son, George Carroll, went on to acquire an additional 121 acres that included the property that is now Hayfield High School. The town was named after George, who became one of the original trustees of the nearby Laurel Grove Baptist Church on Beulah Street. Many of you might know that the Laurel Grove Baptist Church had a tragic fire that occurred, and we're working as diligently as we can to rebuild that church and make sure that in doing that we respect the history attached to that building and restore it as a place for worship in the area. George, the trustees of the nearby Laurel Grove Baptist Church on Beulah Street the town was named after George, who became one of the original trustees of Laurel Grove Baptist Church. And indeed, trees from Carrolltown, which is where Kingstowne is now, provided the lumber to build Laurel Grove Baptist Church and the Laurel Grove Schoolhouse. The Laurel Grove Schoolhouse is sitting adjacent to where the Laurel Grove Baptist Church stood, and we were able to preserve that schoolhouse with a land use application some years ago in the district. And if you haven't been to it and gone into it, you really should, because best of my understanding and the folks involved in it, it really is about as close to exactly the condition it was in when it was used as a schoolhouse. And it's really an interesting little piece of history as you're driving along this busy road with all these activities going on around it, office buildings looming in the background, to understand and picture in your mind how that building was used back when it was an African-American schoolhouse.